From Kurtco Media.
You didn't have computers and wind tunnels and fancy stuff like that.
No. When we did our wind tests, we did with the wool tufts on taped to the car, and then they took pictures of it.
Hello, and welcome to Cars That Matter. I'm your host, Robert Ross. On this week's episode, I met Jim Marietta at his garage where he's building original 1965 Shelby Mustangs with members of the original Venice Crew. We talked about the incredible year the Mustang won 3 vastly divergent races in a row, the unique elements that made Shelby cars such winners, and the work that went into their spectacular legacy. We started our conversation with Jim's own humble beginnings. Jim Marietta, welcome to Cars That Matter. It's great to see you again. You know, you and I met back in 2017, and you were just starting your operation, Original Venice Crew. Tell us about the company and what inspired it.
Well, the inspiration came from the fact that I was one of Shelby's original employees. I worked in shops at home, and my dad had classic cars. Accord and an Auburn, Airflow DeSoto, and a couple other cars, and I worked on those, But what I was inspired about is the reading articles in Sports Car Graphic and the great artwork on the covers, which was I think that was Bill Neal, if I'm not mistaken. And then I would travel around the country following the Shelby races. And finally, Al Dowd asked me one day, "Where do you live, really? Because you're at all the races." And I said, "Well, I live in a kind of a semi-farm community outside of Cleveland, Ohio." He said, "Well, what are you hanging around here for?" And I said, "Well, I want to go to work for you guys." And he said, "Okay." So he says, "Here's what I can do." He said, I'm not going to pay your way back and forth, but if you get here, you can sign on to our employee sheet, so that you don't have to jump the fence anymore to get into the paddock. Well, so that was good for me. And we'll find a place for you to sleep and eat. He said, "Deal?" And we shook hands. And then he said, "Well, by the way, we're not paying you." Which didn't matter to me because I was going to be there anyhow. And so I did basically was kind of the a part of the travel team 64. And so Al said, "Hey, we're going to hire a bunch of guys next year. You want to come to work for us?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I'll send you a letter." So he sent me a letter in December of 64, and he said, be at Venice with your tools, ready to work on January the 2nd. So I left home December 26th and headed out, and by myself with my toolbox and clothes and.
So the first Shelby operation was, of course, in Venice, California, where you were a teenager working on cars that you had no idea would turn into some of the most important cars in the world. This show is called Cars That Matter, and I think if there's any car that matters from that period, it would have to be the cars that Shelby was building.
Oh, I think without question. Of course, the GT350 is what we do because that was my primary job. But the Daytona Coupe, which is in the Smithsonian Institute. I mean, you can't get better than that.
That's right.
The 427 Cobra, the 289 Cobra, the GT350, the Sunbeam Tiger.
That's right.
The King Cobra. And then near the end of 64, we got the GT40s.
Right. So really, you guys, I can't imagine how Shelby and the small group of guys were able to actually do all of this work, completely separate kinds of cars. You've got endurance cars. They were even building drag cars, for crying out loud,
right.
like the Cobras. A car for any number of purposes, any number of styles. I mean, all kinds of stuff. How did you keep track of all these projects?
Well, luckily I didn't have to, but I guess it was an inspired group of artists, really.
Trying to shoehorn a small block Ford into a Sunbeam Tiger,
exactly,
or turning what Shelby always called a secretary's car into a race car, which is obviously what we're surrounded by now.
Everybody had a skill, and it was a very much of a can-do. well, we'd try this, and if it didn't work, we'd try that and try this and try that, and then until it worked. And the other thing that we did a lot of is we did a lot of testing. We did a lot of testing.
You didn't have computers and wind tunnels and fancy stuff like that.
No. When we did our wind tests, we did with the wool tufts on taped to the car, and then they took pictures of it.
Isn't that amazing?
To see how the.
But hey, it worked.
And it worked real well. About a year or so ago, we did that ourselves, and so, which was a lot of fun to see how that worked.
That's right, on your continuation cars.
A continuation car with a reverse hood scoop.
Right. Now, that was the one that Pete Brock designed, who, of course, designed the original Daytona Coupe and had a hand in the styling and color exercises and everything with the original GT350. And you're working with Pete still.
Yes.
That, again, is a part of the whole original Venice Crew concept. Tell us, just name a few of the guys so we can put this stuff in context.
I did this because I enjoyed the camaraderie of years ago. And, of course, you always want to, it's always fun to be with a group of guys who win a lot of things. Okay. And so at the 50th anniversary, I decided, geez, maybe we could do this again and kind of recreate the camaraderie. So I talked to Ted, and I talked to
Ted
Sutton, Peter Brock, Jerry Schwartz, and Chuck Cantwell, and said, here's what I want to do. I want to redo the GT350 just like we did years ago.
Now, to put this and set this up for our listeners, if they don't know too much about Shelby Mustang history, there were production cars for the so-called public. They made about 564 total, but of those, there were race cars. And you're talking about the race cars.
Only the race cars. I only worked in the race shop. I never worked in production. And we only built 36.
Okay, a magic number.
In Venice, we only built 2. And we were right in the garage door part. There was only one roll-up door. And so they were nose to tail.
Imagine all that history going through that one garage door.
Yeah. Well, people like Dan Gurney would show up, and Richie Ginther, and they'd just stop by. Well, what are you working on? Oh, we're doing, that's good. Oh, looks good. And they'd go, wander back in the shop because they knew a lot of guys. And, Phil Hill would show up. I mean, world champions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it was a great place to work. Anyhow, so I thought I'd try and kind of put that back together to the extent that you can. Of course, you can never, as one of the Chinese proverbs say, you can never put your foot in the same river twice. So time and things move on. But anyhow, I thought I'd give it a shot. And so Chuck and Jerry live on the East Coast, and so it was more difficult for them. And finally, Peter and Ted thought, well, okay, we'll give it a shot. And so Ted Sutton, myself, and Peter Brock decided to give it a shot. And Peter said, well, where are you going to do this? And I said, well, I want to talk to Gurney and see if I could use Gurney's shop, because his shop is in Costa Mesa.
Right.
Peter says, well, I have room here in my shop. Why don't we do it in my shop? And I got, great idea, because Peter's right there. And so we built the first 2 cars in Peter's garage in Henderson, Nevada. And so it was Ted and Peter and I and other volunteers. When they got word of what was going on, they showed, hey, can we give you a hand? And absolutely. Rick Titus showed up, and
So
he had
racing blood in the mix.
Yeah. Well, his dad won the championship.
That's right.
In the car that I helped build.
Fantastic.
And so as time went on, more people got involved. We had talked about, the handmade plenums. Well, that guy's name is Jerry Kirkpatrick, and he used
that's the intake plenum.
The intake plenum and the splash guard on the fuel tank.
On the fuel tank, right? Beautiful aluminum pieces, handmade,
hand cut, and acetylene welded, which is an art form.
That's right.
It really is an art form.
That's right.
Well, Jerry Kirkpatrick was a mechanic and the driver of the Dragon Snake that won the championship in 1965.
The drag car, right?
The drag car.
Yeah.
And then when we test our cars, we go to Willow, which is where we tested the very first cars.
What could be more authentic than that?
And our test drivers are John Morton, who is another original guy, and Rick Titus. And so, a number of guys show up, because when we go there, if we leave our towed vehicles behind the garage, You don't know whether it's
It looks like 1960 again.
1965 or 2025.
Isn't that amazing? It really is a step back in time. That whole place, I mean, Willow Springs is a step back in time.
So some of the pictures that we have with our car with a reverse hood scoop.
And just to put that hood scoop in context, that was an idea that Pete Brock had, but never got executed. There was just never the time or the money to actually flesh it out. Is that right?
Well, so I asked Peter, he said, Jim, he says, I went to the people at Ford and I told them if we did the reverse hood scoop, we get a little bit higher speed down the back straight, et cetera, and extolled the virtues of a reverse hood scoop. And he said, the response that I got from somebody at Ford said, Peter, the cars are already painted like a skunk. And with a reverse hood scoop, we'll never be able to sell these cars because everybody knows that the air goes through the front of the car. So that was the end of that. So they wouldn't support it. So, it was cowl induction several years ahead of its time.
That's right.
So that's what happened to the reverse hood scoop thing. And so we could move on to another, is the independent rear suspension.
Well, that was an important development. Conceivably, it could have changed the whole nature of the beast, but
no,
it never happened.
That was a cost issue, apparently. So a guy by the name of Klaus Arnig designed it. I believe he was the chief engineer for Ford Advanced Vehicles at the time.
Right.
And so he designed this independent rear suspension. And after we moved to the airport, it was kind of
that's LAX, the big facility.
The big
at LAX.
facility, LAX. Yeah, when we moved from Venice to LAX, I ended up working on trying to put the independent rear suspension in the Mustang, which we did. It wasn't particularly refined at the time, and we used to test like every week with this thing, and finally Ford nixed the project because I later found out that to put the independent rear suspension in the Mustang at the time was going to cost Ford $14.85. Well, today that's about a cup of coffee here.
Right.
But back in the day, you could buy a brand new Mustang for like $2,400.
That's right.
And they were selling all they could make. So why add $14 to the cost of the car, where most people wouldn't care whether it's independent rear suspension or not. So they nixed the project.
You've got an independent rear suspension that you offer in your cars, Jim. Obviously, that's a bespoke piece of equipment. That's a very special setup. Tell us about that.
So when we were putting the cars together in Henderson, Peter called me one day and says, "Hey, there's a guy that called me that said that he has acquired 3 of the original independent rear suspension setups that was at the shop at the airport." So I met with a guy by the name of Dwayne Carling, and Dwayne is a Shelby enthusiast through and through. And so when Ford and Shelby had their falling out in '67, they sent Holman and Moody to pick up all the leftovers, and they took it in several truckloads of parts from LAX to the airport in Charlotte. So anyhow, so they had a garage sale, and so somebody from Georgia buys a bunch of parts, and Dwayne tracked them down and ended up buying 3 original independent rear suspension setups.
So prototypes that, of course, never saw the light of day.
Exactly. And so I talked to Peter about it after I talked to Dwayne, and I said, "What do you think?" He says, "I think we should put it in your car." So we did. So we had to do a little re-engineering because Klaus had designed it to have a little toe steer because it was going to be an everyday car. So when a lady went to park in the parking lot with a toe steer, it kind of helped helped her park. Well, John Morton doesn't need any help getting around turn 1. We had to redesign it, reposition part of it. Nothing major, but reposition it so that it was neutral, no toe steer, right? Because John always, when we were first testing it, you go around the corner and he'd feel funny because it was kicking the rear end out. Once we straightened it out, everybody said, "Geez, the cars they just handle out of the corner. I mean, they just really grab and go." Anyhow, so that's how we ended up with the independent rear suspension.
Well, let's talk about these cars for a minute, Jim. You're building 36 because that's the magic number of our cars that were built originally. Did you get these licensed? You've obviously got a special position in the hierarchy because these are authorized continuation cars. Is that correct?
Well, the first group of them is authorized, and then now we're going to do them under OVC, Original Venice Crew Mustangs, because, as you pointed out, is it really a continuation car, or is it basically a specialty car that's built by the original guys?
Well, that's something you can't replicate. You can't pay any amount of money to have that happen. I mean, even down to the details, you were telling us about the flared fenders. I mean, I'm looking at the cars around here. I'm thinking, wow, these look pretty good. They kind of look like my old 65, but the fenders on mine look better. But wait a minute, I didn't have wheels that were this wide either. So to put these cars on the track, you had to put wide tires on front and back. But to put them on the back, they had to flare the fenders.
Right.
And you did that.
And yeah, so I did the first one, and which is how I got to know a number of people in the shop, because we didn't have sawzalls and we didn't have angle cutters. And so you have to take out a piece of metal between the inner and outer fender. I used what was available at the time, which was a muffler gun. And so with a chisel, with a chisel on the muffler gun. So in the shop, which was all, concrete, or concrete block, it echoed through the shop. And so everybody would come over and go, what are you doing over there? And I'm taking this out, and they go, kind of give me one of those really kind of things and walk away. Phil Remington come over and says, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we're going to flare that fender, and I have to take that piece of metal out. And I said, the only way I thought about doing it, I said, you can't really do it with a hacksaw, and we don't have anything else, and we can't do it with a torch because it'll ruin the metal.
Right.
So I thought of the muffler gun. Oh, well, and then he just walked away. So anyhow, so I got to meet a lot of guys, and then we warmed up the outside fender with a rosebud tip, and then used a body spoon to pull it out, and then warmed up the inside fender and had a match, and then we just tacked various spots. And as you can see on the cars that we do here, the fenders are not pristine, because the original car was not pristine.
Never. These were race cars.
It had little scallops in it, and that's part of the magic of the car.
There's also some magic going on under the hood that probably wasn't entirely original, because some of these engines are pretty powerful. The original motors put out about 306 or 10 horsepower, whatever. And I know a lot of your builds are more potent than that.
Yeah. There were several great engine builders. We were talking about Original Venice Crew. There was an older engine builder by the name of Cecil Bowman. He's like the senior guy, and he ran the dyno most of the time. And then there was Jim O'Leary and Jack Hoare. They all had their secrets. So when O'Leary's engine was on the dyno, he didn't let Jack Hoare or the other guys, see what he did. So they all had, and they were allowed to come up with their own cam grinds, because back in the day, Engel and some of the other cam shops, they were only a mile or so away from Venice, so they do different cam grinds. So some of them got the horsepower up. Jack said that with Weber's, the way he built the engine, he could get close to 400 horsepower.
That's a big number back then.
It was a big number back then.
Wow.
And all the pictures that you see of Venice or the airport, you will never see a lift. Everything we did, the car was on a jack stand. So everything we did underneath the car was on a creeper on our back looking up.
That's like Michelangelo painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He never got to stand up.
When you put these transmissions in the car.
Oh man!
So how did you do that?
How do you, man? You're pressing.
So you put the transmission on your chest,
yeah,
and rolled under the car,
and hoped you had some help on the top.
And you hoped that you had the clutch plate and everything lined up so it would go right in, so you didn't have to wiggle it too much, right? I mean, you're in a somewhat vulnerable position.
Talk about dedication. Well, you were building cars to win races.
Right.
And, I'm looking at that ring of yours, Jim, and I know there's been a big anniversary recently.
Yeah.
And that was an anniversary that celebrated all the victories that these cars in every type of racing achieved 60 years ago. Tell us about your big wingding out at Willow Springs and the people that you were honoring and the victories that were involved.
Well, in 1965, the Shelby Crew won 6 championships, and the biggest championship was the FIA World Manufacturers Championship with a Daytona Coupe. And it was won on July the 4th in Reims, France, with Bob Bondurant driving. I mean, could it be any more American?
That was all American.
It's happened to be happenstance. So we're celebrating that championship. Then we won the A Production Championship with a Cobra.
That's right.
The B Production Championship with a GT350. USRRC Drivers Championship with Ken Miles driving a Cobra. And then we won the AHRA A Sports Racing Dragster Championship and the NHRA Sports Car Championship. 6 championships.
That's unrepeatable. I mean, you could never do that again.
Right.
It's one and done.
Yeah. So it was endurance racing, road racing, and drag racing, all out of a shop.
Just a little bit bigger than this.
Just a little bit bigger than our shop here. With really, in the race shop, there was only like 50 guys, 40, 50 guys. Now, how do you do that? Like you said, how do you do that? Well, you work till 5 o'clock, you go have something, you come back, work till midnight.
That's right. It's called dedication. It's amazing to be able to keep that flame alive for 6 decades and turn out cars that are, literally the original thing. Well, certainly, I mean, these cars have taken a whole new role 60 years later. I mean, these were just old used race cars. I remember Carroll telling me that he couldn't give the Daytonas away. He was ready to push them in the ocean. I think he finally sold them for $5,000 or $6,000 a piece. And these things were worth far less at the time.
Oh, yeah. Well,
and of course,
you could buy these for $500, $1,000.
I've got a friend that bought his for $750. You know him, Steve Beck.
And if you bought them from the shop at the time, you could pull up and buy a car for $500,000, $1,500. And if you brought your pickup, then load it up with spare parts.
Just to get them off the property.
Just to get it off the property.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
So the car that I worked on some 60 years ago, sold a couple of years ago, right, for $4 million.
I don't doubt it for a minute. I remember going to Mecum and seeing one of the Daytona coupes roll off the stage. I think it was a $7 or $8 million sale at the time. I mean, these are priceless relics now, and the fact that you're essentially building the same cars, brand new, same guys, have made the originals. That's an incredible opportunity, I think, because now these cars are really probably more at home on the concourse field than they are on the track because they're such valuable artifacts, and we see a lot of them now. I mean, as you say, I mean, Pebble Beach, Amelia Island, virtually every concours venue features a Shelby race car of some kind, whether it's a Mustang or a GT40 or a Cobra or name your poison.
Yeah, but the cars are made to be driven. I mean, they're really made to be driven. We test our cars at the track. They're all licensed cars. We start almost all of our cars, with the exception of one, I think, is a K-Code car.
So it's a 65 K-Code
fastback. It's a
fastback.
1965 K-Code fastback, just like we started with.
Right, when they rolled out down from San Jose.
Off the assembly line.
Yeah, and the K-Code, just for people who don't know, that was the most potent V8 engine that came out of the factory.
Yeah, and it had various other bolt-on parts. It had disc brakes in the front, higher horsepower engine.
Right, that was the top loader 4-speed that you still use today.
And a 9-inch, heavy-duty rear end.
Positive traction.
And there are a few other goodies that was in it, but it was mostly bolt-on stuff. But it's a K-Code, and that's that was the designation of the high-performance car.
So your VINs replicate, your VINs are those VINs?
Yes, they're original cars. Okay, so it will, when you buy a car from us, it will always be a 1965 car. It will never be a different car. And so these now are historic vehicles in any state. You get historical plates for all these. When I started it, I just thought that would be a better way to go.
Tell us about what's under the hood, or what somebody can specify, because there's a menu of sorts. There are a bunch of options somebody can have.
So you can go with a cast iron 289, cast iron heads, et cetera, et cetera, like the original.
An original car, right?
You get the heads ported and polished, and we can get over 400 horsepower that way with a single 4-barrel. With the engines that we sell most of the time now, is we always start with the original 289 block.
So it's the block that the car was born with, if you can do that?
If you can find a
If
car
you're,
that
if you're
still, if
lucky,
you still
right.
has it.
Yeah, that's a rare bird.
But the reason we start with the original cast iron is because it's been through so many heat cycles.
Sure.
We know it's a hardened
Nothing
piece.
seasoned like the Rock of Gibraltar. I mean,
Right.
those are.
So if I started with a newer engine, it takes a little while to get the cast iron to set up.
It's like concrete. Age strengthens it.
Exactly. So it's the original 289, and then everything in it is brand new, right? New crank, pistons, etc. And then we put aluminum heads on it that are OVC spec or Shelby engine company spec. It's hydraulic roller cam, so you don't have to adjust the valves every 2 weeks.
Right.
And single 4-barrel, and we consistently get 460 horsepower on a reliable engine that doesn't overheat when you go to lunch.
Pump gas.
Yeah, 91 octane pump gas. And so they're fun to drive everywhere, if you will.
You know, I actually don't know if there's a more fun car to drive from the era. You know, obviously we've all driven everything from, Italian V12s to great inline six Jags and, all the great stuff from the 60s. But honest to goodness, Jim, I think a Ford 289 in this lightweight Mustang, it's not sophisticated, it's not fancy, it was never expensive, but damn, they're more fun than any car from the era. It's just the best engine there ever was.
Oh yeah. And it was just a great period of time. I believe that Shelby and the guys changed racing history in the 60s, that 5-year period. One of the secretaries said, working here is like being in Camelot. Something magical happens every day. I mean, there's like 1,000 stories. Where did the Performance Mustang start? In Venice, in the Venice shop in California.
Well, you know what I admire, Jim, what I find fascinating is you're not just obviously building cars in the spirit of and with some of the same hands that made the originals. So there's a commercial endeavor here of sorts. You're also doing something that has no commercial value at all, but has inestimable historical significance. And that's keeping this history alive. And your 60th anniversary celebration and these stories that you're telling, these have deep meaning. And I think automotive historians have to regard this as one of the most important periods in history. And if it weren't for you and a few people like you, it would not be preserved. These stories wouldn't be told. And that to me is, the most remarkable and admirable thing of all.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Are you thinking about building a car collection but aren't sure where to start? Here's a car within reach from Hemmings that could become your garage gold. The 2015 to 2020 Ford Mustang GT350. What a car. There has really never been a Mustang quite like the GT350 with its 520 horsepower Voodoo 5.2-liter V8 engine. With a crossplane crankshaft, it gets up to 8,250 RPM, accompanied by one of the most incredible mechanical soundtracks. Ford backed up the power of that V8 with the appropriate performance parts. A 6-speed manual transmission, big brakes, suspension, wheels, and tires to turn the GT350 into a sports car worthy of competing with a Corvette or even a Porsche GT3. Prices have been stable for years, never really depreciating. You should be able to find a low-mileage example for between $50,000 and $65,000. What if you don't want to buy the whole car? I'm here with Kurt Hopkins, CEO of MCQ Markets. Kurt, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you. It's great being here, Robert.
Kurt, everybody knows that as investments, collector cars can have some huge upside potential. In fact, I've heard that over the last 10 years, as an asset class, they've appreciated as much as 185%.
Yeah, absolutely. So these collector cars are really, fun assets to have. But the main thing about them is they do give some decent returns historically, 10 to 15% per year, on par with what the S&P has done over the same 10-year period. So they can really be a phenomenal investment class. And, one of the interesting things we're seeing in today's market is a lot of volatility. That's why, many advisors, and we're starting to see more and more investment advisors to encourage their clients to look at diversifying, to alternative investments to reduce their exposure to these public markets, as well as seek alternative sources of yield.
Kurt, you've got a lot of cars in your showroom down in Florida. Can investors actually see these cars?
Yeah, well, that's the thing is that obviously we all want to drive them, right? And that's the main thing. But unfortunately, these are investment cars, and the more mileage you put on them, it can impact the valuation. We don't want to do that. So obviously, we curate them, we keep them in pristine shape, and we maintain them very well. But we keep them running, and they're obviously living machines as well. So if they just sit there and they just allow the rust away, well, then that's not good either. So the reason why we have this showroom in Miami and Wynwood, which is a very fun part of town, by the way. So if any of our investors or listeners or your listeners want to come and see the cars, kick the tires, then that's great.
So MCQ Markets gives an investor the opportunity of jumping into the pool, investing in an automobile or a group of automobiles, depending on what their threshold is. But certainly they may get cold feet when they think about putting down six figures or more on a particular automobile.
Well, that's the cool thing about what we do is that we give the opportunity for anyone that's any investor, even if you're someone that wants to put a 5 6 figure number down, you can do that with us. But many of our investors want to put a 3 or 4 figure number down, so $500 or $10,000 or something like that. So we take much smaller amounts, and that's the whole beauty of this fractional investment is that you can get involved with less exposure, but still have the fun of what you would have. And we certainly hope that on our site at mcqmarkets.com/cars that you can see, some really great assets on there and have some fun investing.
By the way, if you're a VIP investor, email directly to Tom at mcqmarkets.com. That's Tom at mcqmarkets.com. Kurt, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure being here, Robert.
Thanks for listening. Join me next time for a conversation with Dennis Glavis. Cars That Matter is a Kurtco Media production. I'm your host, Robert Ross. The show is produced by Bill Curtis and Stuart Halperin, with audio and video production by Ness Smith-Sabadoff, and additional support from Melody Larson, Lindsay Davis, Deborah Smith, and AJ Mosley. To listen to more episodes of Cars That Matter, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like this episode, be sure to rate us 5 stars to help other listeners discover the show. For exclusive video episodes, visit hemmings.com/cars that matter.
From Kurtco Media.